Welcome to Living Chassidus. Together, let's live the Chassidus we learn. Welcome, everybody. Here we are at our Farbrengen Living Chassidus for Zayin Adar. The topic was connecting to the Rebbe even when it seems challenging. So I think it's a really, on the one hand, it's a topic that is near and dear to our generation. It's like we're always working towards connecting to the Rebbe in this day and age. But it is a sensitive topic, and we're very excited that we have Rabbi Chaim Drizin speaking for us today. And we want to say a special thank you to our Farbrengen sponsor, Rachel, in honor of her birthday. She should have Shnas Hatzlacha and Bracha and only revealed good, and we should share in good news. So thank you, Rabbi Drizin, for speaking for us again. You were a big hit last time.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, I'm going to do a preemptive apology. I didn't, I was freestyling.
Yeah, if you want, just clip it by your shirt if possible. Yeah, that works. Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect.
I told you my day job is not as a rabbi, so every once in a while someone will nudge me to give a share and I'll prepare it, but Farbrengen is more freestyle, and not being a pulpit rabbi, that's what I'm more comfortable with. So, and I think that's usually the structure of Farbrengen, that everyone has their own ways. So if I spoke to you last time, I not necessarily wrote down what stories I told you, what I didn't, so I apologize if I repeat a story and you know it. My apologies.
I'm excited to hear it again.
Okay. So it's we're coming from Zayin Adar, right? So that's one of the points of the Farbrengen. For myself and my wife, Zayin Adar is a little poignant because at least the second Zayin Adar was the middle of our Sheva brachas. So we got married on Chof 31 years ago, and then the second Sheva brachas. So it was in Australia, and we got news of Zayin Adar, which was the Rebbe's had a stroke. But Chof Adar was the Rebbe's birthday. That's it was connected to that. But if you're talking about struggling with, I wasn't aware that was the topic. But if you're talking about struggling, so that was a point that was driven home at that time. There's an interesting sikha of the Rebbe where he actually he has an interesting question there. He says, why do miracles happen in the world? If God created the world with teva, with nature, and teva is godliness also, so why do you need a miracle? Every once in a while there's an open miracle, an open mess that happens. I don't remember why he spoke about this. Maybe it was in relation to the 6-day war. Off the top of my head, I don't remember the event. But the Rebbe was addressing miracles, and he said, why does a miracle have to happen? If everything is godliness, what's the difference between a miracle and your day-to-day life? Right? The sun rises, it's a miracle also. So the Rebbe says a fascinating thing, and he says it in English in the Sikha. He says, because if not, the world would be boring. He uses the word boring, right? Which I find fascinating, right? And what does the Rebbe mean there? Let's explain this concept, is that we're human beings. And we're finite human beings. And yes, everything is godliness. And if you meditate and you delve into it and you think about it, you will come to that realization. But being human beings, every once in a while, we need to see something, right? We need to have something that we can grab onto. So therefore, according to the Rebbe, in order that the world shouldn't be boring, he makes a miracle every once in a while to just remind you of where things are at. Why am I telling you this story? Because, obviously, after Zayin Adar and Gimel Tammuz and all these things that have happened in the last 31 years, sometimes it gets difficult, right? We're human beings, and we have to be able to see past the haze and the fogginess, right? So every once in a while, at least to me, I always find that there's something that comes your way that reminds you of it. Like I even remember, as just one example, I forget what it was. It could be I was in a lousy mood. It was maybe after my father was next door or something like that. And I was speaking to a friend of mine, and it was this conversation me and a friend were having, and it was via phone. Right, we were all locked into the houses with the COVID, and maybe I came across very sour. I was telling, we miss having the Rebbe on a day-to-day basis. Remember, I grew up here where the Rebbe was the rabbi of our shul, right? And I was sort of venting to him, right? That that this is hard. And the minute I hung up the phone, boom, my phone pings, and someone sends me a picture of me getting a kosher bracha from the Rebbe that he just found. This is a person who I didn't speak to maybe in 10 years before that. And that exact moment decided to send me a picture of getting kosher bracha. So I said, okay, I got it. And there were certain things. I remember, as I might have told you last time, I as a bracha, I got sent to South Africa on shluchos for 2 years, and we didn't come back. And I remember one of the things that hit me a little hard was Pesach time. Why? Because we always used to go up and get matzah from the Rebbe. They would give out matzah. Later, he switched it, and they gave it to the Koil. People used to give it out. But for many years, you got matzah directly from the Rebbe, and later on, you got it through the Koil members, but it was still matzah from the Rebbe. And I remember feeling before Pesach that, not down, but it would be nice to get it matzah from the Rebbe. And I remember that night I went to sleep. I'm not a guy who dreams much or remembers my dreams. And I'm standing in back of 770, and the Rebbe comes out and gives me a box of matzahs. Wow. And it was such a vivid dream that I woke up and I was like looking around, where's my matzah? And then I realized, oh, it's a dream, right? Now, people could say because I was thinking about it and so on, but this was the dream. The only other time that something like that happened is I have a daughter, Mushka, and she's 15 years old now. And after she was born, we named her Mushka. She's already a couple of girls in by me. And I think Mushka is an unusual name, and we named after a couple of grandmothers and so on. And this is the one we named Mushka. And I woke up in the morning, I told my wife, I had the strangest dream, right? And when I'm sitting in a garden and I'm holding the baby, and this regal-looking woman comes over to me, smiling, and I'm saying, I don't know who this woman is, and so on. I was just smiling, and my wife just points out, "You don't know who the woman is?" She shows me the picture of the Rebbetzin, and I said, "Oh, I remember it struck me who that was, right?" There was so every once in a while there's a little message that comes in different ways. As an aside, and I hope you don't mind if I said I'm in a freestyle. So my daughter Mushka was born in again, this is 15 years ago. She was born in Manhattan in Lenox Hill Hospital on Shabbos. And while I was in the hospital, there was a Satmar fellow there. His name was Lichtenstein, maybe, and his wife had a baby also. And over Shabbos we got together and we became friends over Shabbos. So he tells me a story of why he was there. He said that him and his wife. Well, he starts actually before. He says years ago there was a little bit of politics between Satmar and Chabad, and there were a couple of hotheads that vandalized the mitzvah tent that was in Williamsburg. Now Baruch Hashem, some are our best friends and our biggest supporters, but then a few hotheads did things that maybe they regret. And he says he was one of those. As very young, he was one of them. And after he got married, for many years, he didn't have children. And he got it into his head that it was because of his role that he played with the mitzvah thing. So he decided he needs to ask forgiveness. So he gathered 10 people. I heard the story from him. He gathered 10 people and he went to the oil. And he asked for mechila, for forgiveness, b'ravim. And he says, 9 months later, I'm here with you in the hospital.
Oh my God.
That's the story the guy told me. That's as I'm going to sidetrack with Mushka. I don't know how many people are in Machan Yahadus, but my wife told me she taught a Sikha there. Chof is Schwarze, right? Yeah. So you know the Sikha? No?
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm not gonna relearn the whole Sikha with you, but there's a point there. She might have told you the story because I told it to her. So one of the points that Rebbe makes in the Sikha, the Rebbe talks about the role of women in this world, and it's very interesting. The Rebbe talks about Adar Allah Yisbarah B'Tafeh. He talks about the dwelling place on this world, right? This is living Chassidus 101. You make a dwelling place here on this world. Interestingly enough, there is in Likkutei Sichos there is a famous Shavua Sikha, where it's a fascinating halachic analysis that the Rebbe does about. He talks about the argument between the Jews and the Malachim and the angels about receiving the Torah, where the angels wanted that God should give them the Torah, and the Jews, God was arguing with them why the Jews should get the Torah. One of their complaints were that they are bar metzra. Bar metzra, there's a halachic concept that if you have a house or a field, right, and you want to sell it, and the neighbor wants to buy the field, halachically you're obligated to sell it to the neighbor. Why? Because he has the field right next door. It makes the most sense for him to buy that field, and to sell it to someone else would be cruel, and therefore he has a right to buy it first.
Yeah, we use that here in real estate in Crown Heights.
Technically, if you go to a din Torah with someone, and the guy sells it to someone else, you can actually call him to a Rav and demand the house back.
I know some of them asked the Shiloh if they were selling the house, and they went to Rav to ask if they have to.
Wow.
There are certain outs. If the other person doesn't have a house and whatever, there are certain outs to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the question has to be more nuanced. What is the halacha? Yes, you have to sell it to the neighbor. What do people actually do?
Right.
It's between them and God.
Well,
but
does it apply to
yeah, there are certain things that are called midas time. In others, it's just cruel. If it's better for one person, and all things being equal to you, specifically to sell to someone else instead of him would be cruel, right? Because he won't have an opportunity to buy his next door, again. So therefore, the Torah tells us there are certain things you have to do in a way to be kind, and this is one of them. So the Malachim were claiming that the Torah is in the heavens and they deserve it, and it's all back and forth. But that's my point is not to speak about a Shavua Sikha. There is a footnote in that particular Sikha which I always found fascinating. Being my day job is real estate, the Rebbe says that the desire of a person to own a house, its source is in the desire of God to make a dwelling place for himself here on this world.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
He brings it down from a mimer in Samach Vav. Famous Samach Vav is a famous hemshech of Chassidic discourses. If you look, it's in volume Yudches, the Shua Sikha. There's one of the footnotes brings this out that every Jew has an innate desire to own a house. Why? Because God wanted a dwelling place here on this world, and that's why He created people with that desire to have a house. Now, in that Sikha, the Rebbe takes it a little further and he says, who's the one who actually brings this into practice? The man might work the finances, not always, but sometimes, right? But who actually makes it into a home is the woman. And the Rebbe goes over many times in the tzipah, he says, the woman makes it a dira noviyaf. He uses the words, which is two different words of beautiful, warm and pretty and so on. And the Rebbe says that's the role of the woman. The woman does everything in that way. So the story with my parents happened, and this is my segue into that, is that when my parents got married, this was about 1964, they didn't have children for many years, for several years. I was born in 68, so I'm the oldest I have a twin actually. And so they actually, when they got married, they lived in Crown Heights and they bought a house. Now there's actually Jews there again, but at that time it was considered a fancier area. That's that East 92nd, there's down there. That's where a lot of younger families are moving these days. So they bought a house there that was much newer. The Crown Heights houses were much older, and that was a nice, new, fixed-up apartment. And my grandmother, my father's mother, who was, she was Russian, and she was from the shtetl she grew up, and she was convinced that the reason they didn't have children was because they lived in a beautiful house, and everyone's jealous, and it's an ayin hara. So she was insisting to my father, he needs to move out of the house. He needs to move to a more simpler, plainer house, right? And she wasn't letting up about it. And my grandmother was a great woman. When it came to these things, it was, she could be very insistent. And so my father said, look, I'll write to the Rebbe and I'll ask him what he thinks about this, right? So he wrote to the Rebbe. He wrote to the Rebbe and he said that we don't have children for a nice amount of years. And that was 3 years and change. And my mother is insisting that the reason is because there's an ayin hara here and the evil eye, right? And we need to move out of this house. Why? Because he wrote, Adira Naviyah. It's an apartment that's nav, nice, and yaf, and beautiful. Mm-hmm. So the Rebbe answered, and this is classic, Rebbe. He says, the Rebbe answered, Lihishar Badira, remain in the apartment, Bishvil, because because it's a beautiful apartment, you should definitely remain in the apartment. As the Rebbe said, the Rebbe wasn't a fan of ayin haras in general. That's if you look at different answers. He wasn't, and it's based on a Gemara where it says if you give it credence, it becomes a thing. If you don't, it doesn't. But the Rebbe said specifically, you should remain in the house because it's a beautiful house. And it's actually interesting because, as you know, when my wife asked me to learn the Sikha with her, I noticed that this is the gist of the entire Sikha. The Rebbe says that it's not enough to have a dwelling place here on this world. It needs to be a dira naviyafa. It needs to be a beautiful house. And the Rebbe translated, it has to be, those are the things that the one. That's, I'm not getting over. I was gonna say. And but that's what the Rebbe points out. This is the way the woman goes about everything. Why is the woman responsible for chinuch for children? Because a woman's way is to do it with warmth and with life and so on and so forth. And men tend to get more technical, like I'm going to do the job and that's it. There's another story comes to mind along that vein, but not necessarily exactly. It's also around Yud Aleph Nisan, right? These are all the things that are happening now. So I was 13. This was Tafshin Mem Beis, Yud Aleph Nisan, and the Rebbe gave out Tanyas, right? And someone gave a count. There's a couple of times the Rebbe gave out Tanyas. Baruch Hashem, I was zeichet to get a Tanya every single one of those times.
Wow.
this was the first time I got to Tanya, and it was a brown Tanya. I still have it. And later on, I gave it a blue Tanya and then a soft cover Tanya at different times. But this was Yud Aleph Nisan Tavshin and Beis. And I was 13. So when I was 13, I was, I felt I was growing up, and I was taking things more seriously than I took before I was bar mitzvah. And so what I was doing, the Rebbe was giving out a Tanya. There must be something spiritual going on here, right? And after getting onto the lines and making it close to the front, I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to get a Tanya from Rebbe, something special. And you have to take it very seriously and prepare yourself for it. So it must have actually come across in my demeanor, because I was on the other side. Like the Rebbe used to stand, his chair was on one side, so he used to give on the side of where his chair was, and then he would give over the table. Mm-hmm. This is how we used to do the Kaisha Bracha, and so I was on the other side. And I'm standing there waiting to get my Tanya, and the Rebbe sticks out the Tanya to me, and he puts it in my hand. I had it in my hand, and then the Rebbe yanks it back with a smile, right? And I didn't know what that was all about. And I was standing there smiling at me, and then he sticks out the Tanya again, and puts it in my hand. It was a huge smile on his face, right? And I have the Tanya. I think, I don't know what that was about. And again, I have it in my hand, and he yanks it back. It was 2 or 3 times. I don't remember exactly. And then the Rebbe comes like this, all right? His full, and I had to sing for my Tanya. And I almost died. I don't remember. I had to stand there for my Tanya, and then there was smile. There was enough, and he gave me the Tanya, right? And this was at that age, I wasn't super out there. I was more reserved maybe, and so this was, I didn't know what that was all about. And I remember I came out there after, you push through and you come out to the other side, and there were a few older Chassidim sitting there. First, I thought I imagined the whole thing. And then my cousin, who was a couple of years older than me, who was actually standing, he says, Chaim, I see that Rebbe gave you a hard time. Right? So, okay, so that happened, right? And so then I went to a few of the older, wiser, of the day, and I forget who I asked. And I said, what was that all about? What did it ever want from me? So they told me, and again, I don't remember exactly who it was. I was just so overwhelmed by the whole thing. They told me that Rebbe thinks you're too serious, right? You're too serious. You need to be a little bit more simple, right? So I always took it that, you know what, if I came down and I asked them, this is what they told me, that's what it must be, right? And it was, I remember sitting there thinking I'm gonna connect, Elam Nesel Yainim to Tachtainim to the, and we're gonna catch Malachim here and so on. They ever wanted, just exactly what he did. He wanted to, be the simple and so on. Ever since then, I don't take anything seriously. I actually remember that ever doing that. Whatever, people go up, have ups in life and downs and so on. Just it's okay. That's be the simple and so on. There's Pesach's coming, right? I'll give you. I might have said this.
Well, here it's Hanukkah, and here it's break out the matzah. Let's go.
Back to my parents with the children is that and the matzahs, right? So as I told you, the Rebbe used to give out matzahs before Pesach, always. So I remember growing up getting it a lot of times. My father got it for many years more than me, and so he told me that in that period of time also that they didn't have children. He went to get matzahs from the Rebbe, and he took 2 matzahs. The Rebbe gave him 1 matzah, and then he held out his hand. The Rebbe gave him a 2nd matzah. And then as he was walking away, he thought my father's first language was Yiddish. He says, the Rebbe chapped him by Marble. He said, the Rebbe caught him by his yeah. And he pulled him back. And he said in Yiddish, Farbrengen is the zweite matzah. Well, who is the 2nd matzah? So my father said, it's from my wife. So the Rebbe took the matzah away. And he said, das geht zusammen. That goes together. Right? So, there's no separate husband and wife. This is one, right? And my father said that was the year that he had children. He says that once. Well, he says from when the Rebbe drove home the point, he says that was my father's, and that was his bracha to have children. He says das geht zusammen, and that's an important lesson. Eventually, people get married and so on. It goes together. It's a Pesach matzah lesson. These are stories, right?
You mentioned that you're the oldest, but you're twins.
Yeah,
I'm actually,
yeah, exactly.
Double the bracha.
And my twin is actually 2 minutes older than me, so I'm technically yeah.
The truth comes out.
The mother actually says in those days she didn't know she was having twins. That's so. It was a bit of I was a surprise.
Also pretty like
what's
that?
not like 20 years.
2 years ago, I think.
You what?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
that somebody in Lubavitch family.
Oh, they didn't know.
They didn't
My
know.
mother said she had no idea. She was in shock.
Yeah.
There's an interesting story that the Rebbe tells. There's also a Pesach Simcha, and so the Rebbe talks about in 1905 there was a war between Russia and Japan. Japan actually won the war later. It was funded by there was a Jewish guy that hated the Tsar, so he funded the Japanese, a guy named Jacob Schiff. Also, he was a New York Jew. He wasn't religious, but I think he actually gave Lubavitch some money way back when. But what happens is the Russians sent a lot of Jews to fight against Japan. So they were conscripted and they were sent to the army and they were forced to fight. So they were dug in around the trenches of Shanghai. And the Rebbe Rashab was very active in regards to Jewish soldiers. So one of the things he took to heart and he made sure was that all the Jewish soldiers should get matzah for Pesach. And so he worked really hard and he raised money for it and he collected and he made sure they got it. And most of the Jewish soldiers were able to have matzah for Pesach. So after Pesach, a large group of soldiers got together and they wanted to send a thank you letter to the Rebbe Rashab. This is a story that Rebbe tells. And so they wrote a letter and they thanked the Rebbe Rashab for the matzahs. And they signed it, Soldati, this is in Russian, right? Or Soldati Akapi Shanghai, the soldiers in the trenches around Shanghai. This is how they signed the letter of thanks to the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab, when he received this letter, he read it and he was very serious. He had a very serious expression, the Rebbe says, when he read this letter. And he started talking about the Baal Shem Tov. He said the Baal Shem Tov used to sign his name Yisrael Me'akov. There are letters from the Baal Shem Tov that exist. Right now it's become the rage for the last couple of years that all these auction houses, they sell books, svarim, and letters, so you can actually go and see these letters from the Baal Shem Tov and so on. I'm sure the Rebbe's library has many of them. I know there's a siddur of the Baal Shem Tov, but the Baal Shem Tov used to sign his letters Yisrael Me'akov. Now, if you look at a lot of the history books when they write stories about the Baal Shem Tov, including, strangely enough, the book that they came out from Kahos, which is a Lubavitch book, they say that they'll say the Baal Shem Tov was born in the little town of Akup, and they'll tell you the whole story, right?
I think it's a footnote on the bottom. Like, well, Akop actually means.
Oh, do they?
I'm pretty sure I saw it in
Maybe
the
they
footnote.
corrected in following, but the original one I saw.
Nice, yeah.
So the Sikha the Rebbe says like this, that Akup never existed. There's no such place, Akup. That's why I say it's strange that Lubavitch put out a book that says the Baal Shem Tov was born in the little town of Akup. And so why do
Is
they
it?
what?
Which book? Does it say that?
I think it's like the newer one, the great,
The Great
Mission.
The Great Mission.
something like that.
Really?
Yeah,
So I read like a really old one. It
The
had
old
so
ones-
many things that didn't make sense.
the
Like,
ones
so
might have
many
been more
wrong
correct than the
information.
new ones.
Sound like a narrator.
But the Rebbe says that the Baal Shem Tov was born in a town called Tlust. That's where the Baal Shem Tov actually was born. So where did the mistake come from? Where do people start? Because he used to sign his name Yisrael Ma'akov, Yisrael from Ma'akov, right? So why did he sign his name Yisrael Ma'akov? So the Rebbe explains. The Rebbe says that the Baal Shem Tov's parents were extremely poor people. They couldn't even afford a house, right? And the town they lived in had a wall around it, and it was an ancient wall around the town. And then I believe it was the Crusaders came and they destroyed the wall around the town of Tlust. And they destroyed the wall, and what was left around the town was a ditch. Where the wall used to be, they destroyed the wall, was left a ditch. The Baal Shem Tov's parents were so poor that they lived in the ditch. They made some sort of a dwelling, I guess, in the ditch, and they lived in the ditch. That's how poor they were. And the Baal Shem Tov was actually born in this ditch. He was born in a ditch. So he used to sign his name. The Rebbe says, Yisrael Ma'akub, the boy from the ditch, right? Which is an amazing thing if you think about the Baal Shem Tov, right? So the Rebbe says the Baal Shem Tov, you have to understand who the Baal Shem Tov was, right? This is the person who brought the light of Chassidus to the entire world, right? Baal Shem Tov was born right after the times, it were terrible times, right? There was there were massacres taking place, Tach V'Tat, right? The Cossacks were right before, up until the Holocaust, probably the worst massacres the Jews had. Shabtai Tzvi was wreaking havoc amongst the Jews, right? And the Baal Shem Tov was born. The Baal Shem Tov turned it all around. You know, people were lost, people were in a haze, people were, didn't know if they were coming or going. The Baal Shem Tov came and everything changed. He brought light into the world and so on. And the Rebbe says, and this is the boy who was born in the ditch. This is the boy who used to sign his name, Yisrael Ma'akab. He was born in a ditch. How much lower can you get, right? There are poor people, and then there are really poor people, right? And then there's the boy who's born in the ditch. So you're taking someone who was the low of the low in his physical circumstances, and he managed to light up the whole world, right? So this was when the Rebbe Rashab was reading this letter, he told this story. That's why he says he was so patracht, he was so thinking about the answer from the soldiers, that he wanted to point out that from Bira Mikta, from the lowest of the low, you can still light up the whole world. You can still reach the highest of the high. Right? Okay. Even until 9, right? Okay. I don't know if you want to ask questions or I can continue. I could go. All right. Yeah, I'm trying to remember which stories I told you last time and which ones I didn't. So not to say it twice. There was again, these are stories that happened around Pesach. Some are with the Rebbe, and some just happened to me. Like again, I told you there are times that God makes the world not boring, and he sends you a little bit of a sign, so to remind you what's important and what's not. So so I live on Carroll Street, and across the street from my house there's an apartment building, and there were a couple of friends that used to live in that building, and every Sukkot there's a courtyard in the building, and they would make a Farbrengen. So Chalamayit Sukkot is always like a good Farbrengen. So I didn't even realize it was them. I heard singing, so it was wafting over to my side of the street. So it was 1 o'clock in the morning. I went across and I found myself at this Farbrengen. It was friends of mine anyways, so I sat down and I made myself famous. There was a boy there who was telling these beautiful stories and beautiful Dvar Torahs, and he was a South African boy. Now, I was sent as a buffer for 2 years to South Africa, so at one point I prided myself that I knew every single Jew in South Africa. I don't think it's true anymore. Whenever I meet someone and I don't know his name, I say, "Oh, you were after my time," right? And so this is, a South African boy telling, and I was actually very impressed with him. I asked him his name, didn't ring a bell by me, and I was actually a little perturbed by it. And I asked him, "Where are you from?" So he told me he's from a town called East London. And East London is, when you go to the corner of the world and then you go a little bit further, that's where East London is. So I asked him, how is it that a Jew from East London is sitting here in the sukkah? He was a bacher, and he was a Chassidish bacher. I said, how did you land here? So he told me a story which sort of blew me away at the time. And, I tell the story and I like retelling it. We were there for 2 years, and one of the directives that the Rabbi gave us is go for 2 years, and I don't want you to come back. So we stayed for 2 years. The Rebbitzins Levaya I wasn't at because I was in South Africa. We weren't allowed to come back, and so I only went into the Rebbe's house recently. I missed that whole period of time, and so we were stuck there for Tishrei. It was a schos, but we felt we were. Up until that point, I never missed the Tishrei at the Rebbe, and that was the first Tishrei of my life. We were 10 guys, and honestly, most of us didn't even know how Tishrei works when you're not in 770. So 9 of us got jobs as chazanim and shuls. Me and chazanis. I mean, I like listening to it, but singing it is not my thing. And I don't think it would be a thing for people who are listening to me sing it. So I got a job as a Rav in a shul in Cape Town. And so we went there. A friend of mine got a job as a chazan in a place called Otzorn. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. It's not unless you live in Africa, it's not a place to live here. In the 1920s, it was famous. Why was it famous? Because it's the ostrich feather capital of the world. In the 1920s, you ever see the old pictures of the 20s where all the women have these big ostrich feathers? It was a style for like 3 days. Otzorn was the capital of it. So they became very wealthy because they were exporting ostrich feathers around the world. And of course, who controlled the ostrich feather trade was a few Jews, Goldstein, Goldberg, and something like that. And they built a beautiful shul on the corner of the world. And by the time we were there, way past the ostrich feather craze prime, and but there was still a couple of people there, and they had enough for a minyan, and they wanted a chazan, and they hired my friend as the chazan in Otzorn. So in order to get to Otzorn, he had to drive down from Johannesburg. And it's a 24-hour drive from Johannesburg to Otzorn through crazy country, beautiful but crazy. And he had to stop on the way. He wasn't going to drive it straight. So someone set it up somewhere in the middle of the road was this place called East London. And he stayed the night. There was a couple there. They weren't religious. someone at the Zionist Federation or something like that knew someone who agreed to have the bacher, the yeshiva bacher, sleep over at night. He came at night, he left in the morning, and he continued to Otzorn to do his ostrich feather thing. What he didn't realize is, he got up in the morning, he got up early because he had to get to Otzorn, and he davened. He put on tefillin and then he davened. He didn't realize that there was a little kid there in the house. Why didn't he realize? Because he never saw the kid. Right? The kid was too shy. The kid didn't come out. But the kid was peeking out of his doorway, and he was watching the bacher. He saw the bacher put on tefillin. He saw the bacher pull out his siddur and daven, and then he saw the bacher leave without ever having said hello to the bacher, right? To the yeshiva boy. When my friend left, when the bacher left, the boy came out of his room, and he asked his parents, "What was that?" Right? So they said that was a yeshiva bacher. We hosted the yeshiva. What's a yeshiva bacher? Well, this is a rabbinical student who's learning in yeshiva and he's going somewhere, and we hosted him for the night. What were the black box on his head? That's tefillin. What's tefillin? Tefillin is something that Jews put on. The kid asked his parents, "But aren't we Jewish?" Yeah, but we're not that type of Jew, right? What do you mean not that? Do you have tefillin? Yes, I have tefillin, but it's in the closet, and I haven't taken it out since my bar mitzvah. So he said, "Could you show it to me?" Right? And so the father pulls out the tefillin, and the kid asks him to explain it. And he says, "So why, if we're Jewish, why didn't you put it on?" So he humored the kid, and he put on the tefillin. Right? Put on the tefillin, and something happened, and he decided the son liked it, the father liked it, the mother liked it, and they decided to do that again a couple of times, right? Anyways, one thing led to the next, and then they started keeping kosher, then they started keeping Shabbos. The kid ended up in yeshiva in Johannesburg, right? Kid ended up becoming totally frum, and ended up in 770, and then ended up in a sukkah in Crown Heights.
Did you connect them?
So this is the amazing thing, right? My friend is an accountant in California now. And I called him. I hadn't spoken to him for years, right? We're friends, but it wasn't one of my closer friends, just friendly. And I tell him, I said, "Avramo, do you remember going to East London years and years ago?" He says, "Sure." I said, "You remember who you stayed at?" "Yeah, I stayed at this couple," he tells me. So I said, "Who was in the house?" He says, "It was this couple." I said, "Was there anyone else in the house?" So he goes, "No, absolutely not." I said, "Did they have any kids that you saw?" "Nope, there were no kids." And he remembers clear as day. So I tell him the story. I said, you even have an idea what you've accomplished?"
Whoa.
Okay. And he was blown away. I was blown away. What actually, it's not the fact that the kids became from happens, right? What sort of really hit home with me is he had no idea. He had no idea that he stopped in a house, he upended an entire family, their entire lives changed for generations, and he had no clue of what he accomplished, right? And this is because the Rebbe told us. Yeah, this is because the Rebbe told us to stay in South Africa and not come home, and we had to find these interesting jobs all over the place. Actually, one of my friends got a job in Stellenbosch, which is wine country.
Oh, one of our alumni.
There's a shliach there now.
Yes.
Beautiful place. And he thought, who's Stellenbosch? No one's going to know the difference. He decided to redo Kol Nidre to the tune of one of Avram Fried songs. And that didn't go down well. Because actually I was walking in my shul, and someone, the president of Stellenbosch shul tells me, "You want to hear something funny?" He says, "Someone sent me a Chad Gadya tape." In those days there were tapes. You had to send the tape of your singing. And he said, "Say me a Kol Nidre like you've never heard." And I told my friend, you want to know why you didn't get the job? I'm going to explain to you. There is a tune for it. But my point is that, right, sometimes God makes the world shouldn't be boring. Sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't, right? We got lucky on that time that I saw it, right? Why? Because I met the boy so many years later, and he was able to help me connect the dots and see something that happened. There's 1,000 times more that we don't see, right? There was another time that I used to have right Neftzayim, we used to call it. So every Friday we would go on Neftzayim. I went to a place called Brompton, which now is you can't walk in there unless you're driving a Sherman tank. And but I had a seder that I would go. I would visit this guy, put on tefillin, that guy, and South Africans are pretty easy with tefillin. And then I would get a share in an insurance company. There was a military building on the corner. I used to pass the military building. This was my route. I used to go the same route every single week together with a friend of mine who's now a shliach in Montreal. And you know Montreal, Krasiansky, Maishi? And you're from Montreal? Okay, Maishi is a good friend of mine. We used to pass this military building on Amishov Street every single week, go give the share in Liberty Life, put on more tefillin. While we're walking down Amishov Street, there's an Israeli guy runs out, new guy, we hadn't seen him before, and he says, Chabad, come, I want to put on tefillin. So instead of going to the corner and crossing, we were from New York, so we decided we're crossing the middle of the street, because the guy's, so we cross over the street and we start wrapping the guy tefillin, and also the entire building shakes. I didn't even know what it was. He was an Israeli. He knew. He all of a sudden he's under the table, and he says it was a pipe bomb, right? What was it? There was now they run the country. The ANC was a terrorist group in those days, and Nelson Mandela was the head of it, and they were putting these pipe bombs all over the place. So on that military building on the corner where we were about to walk through, there was a pipe bomb there was a window on the outside, and they put a bomb on the window, and it blew out. It actually blew out across the street. It killed a guy driving on a motorcycle on the street because it blew out like that. And it took me a few minutes to realize that we were actually supposed to be right there, but the Israeli guy came and called us, and he said, come put on tefillin. So we crossed the middle of the street to wrap in tefillin. Right? It was actually funny in a way, because I came home, I never told my parents the story. And years later, after my father was lifted, my mother used to come eat by me the whole time, and I forgot, and I never told her the story. And I was telling someone else the story, and all of a sudden I see this is years later, and she's turning white. And she says, you never told me that story. I said, that's true. All right. But this is the point, is that there are these especially in today's day and age, you have to pick up where you see these. I think it's important that you pick up these stories, because not that it's not happening the whole time around you, right? Right. You have to say, how do we cope with today? If you look for it, it's around you, but you need to notice it. I have a friend. His name is Dan Schneider. He's an entertainment lawyer. He's a good friend of mine. He's not religious, but he has a warm heart. And how do I know him? Because myself and a friend of mine, he lives in Granite, Shlomi Newbert, he's an attorney. He's a district attorney. And we have a custom. Every Hanukkah, we take a day off and we go on the Zayin. We pretend we're shluchim, and we pick a random town upstate. We get a bag of jelly donuts and menorahs, and we go. Honestly, we make it up as we go along. And we've been to a lot of different weird towns. So one year we went to Woodstock, right? Because Woodstock is famous, and it's actually not the site of the concert, but it's Woodstock. The whole town is a little trippy and interesting, and there's a lot of Jews there. And we decided this is a good place to go. So we go upstate. Problem was it's Hanukkah, and we didn't anticipate the blizzard, right? So we're slogging around this town with a bag of jelly donuts and menorahs, and there's about 4 feet of snow there, and there's not a soul out on the streets, and it's freezing, and we're thinking maybe this is not a great idea. And then we see a sign, Dan Schneider, Esquire, and this guy has to be Jewish, right? So I knock on the door, and the guy opens the door with crack, and he says, "I already gave," and he starts slamming the door, right? So I put my foot in the door. Why? Because honestly, I was a little desperate at that point. And I said, "Look, Dan, right? We're not collecting money. Okay? I said, if 2 Mishagayim came out in this crazy blizzard with a bag of jelly donuts and a menorah, you're not slamming the door in my face, right?" So he liked that, and he says, "Fine, come in," right? And we come inside, we gave him the menorah, and ever since then we've been great friends. He's been to Crown Heights many times. I know his family. His wife's not Jewish, unfortunately, but and I know his kid, and his kid is a kid named Max Schneider, and I know him since he was a little kid. And when he grew up, he became a singer, relatively famous also. Right, he had a platinum record. I didn't know what a platinum record was till he explained it to me. And well, yeah, and it's actually funny because he's friends with all the most trendy singers. I know a lot of their names. Other than their names, I know nothing about them. Other than that he sings with them or is on them, whatever. But his father calls me up one day, and he says, "I have a problem." Right? He just started hitting his peak. His son Max. He goes by the name Max, and he had one record that was platinum, one double platinum. What evidently it's the amount of times that the song plays and how many people listen to it. And it looked like he was going for like superstardom as a singer. And he says, "I have a big problem." He goes, "What's the problem?" He says, "The doctors discovered a growth on his vocal cords." And he says, "First of all, I'm worried about him." But he says, even if you go in there to do an operation, he says, his voice, this is his, so I say, I hear you. I said, "Why don't you come with me to the aisle?" He says, "All right, I'll come." And I said, "Let Max come to the aisle also." You don't have to be Jewish to go to the aisle, right? And so he says, "Fine." He was very receptive to it, and he came with me to the aisle. And I sat down, I explained to him, you write a pun and you put it in and so on. And Max wrote a pun and Dan wrote a pun, and they went inside. And I every time I go, I put in a pun, and I came out. And but Max was sitting there at the aisle, and remember, his mother's not Jewish, so he's not Jewish, and he's crying like a baby, right? And I was actually, when he came out, I told his father, Dan, I said, I'm very impressed. I said, he's not Jewish, but if you watch him, I said, he looks like he's been he's a chassid for many years, the way he's writing upon and davening here. I said, I'm very impressed with him. So Dan tells me, he says, and at that time I knew him already 20 years. He says, "Oh, he always felt very close to the Rebbe." So I said, "Man, I know you for a long time." I thought I'm the guy who introduced you. I said, "What do you mean he feels close to the Rebbe?" He says, "Oh, I never told you." And he tells me that he starts telling. He says that when his son Max was born, he was born at Mount Sinai Hospital, and before he was born, the doctors came in all serious, and they said, "Look, there's problems with this birth." And they said, "We just want to prepare you we're absolutely certain this baby's not going to make it. So we don't want it to be a shock. Obviously, it's a horrible thing. We want you to psychologically prepare yourself. You know, we're going to try to save the mother, but the baby's not going to make this. Whatever the problem was, this problem's. So he says he walked in, he was totally devastated, but he had to, you know, support his wife. So he was in there knowing that this is ending in disaster. In the middle of the birthing process, the doctor looks up and he says, I don't know what just happened. He says, this is an outright miracle. He says, in all my years, and I'm an experienced doctor, this has never happened, but he says, the baby's going to make it. He says, the baby's going to be fine. He says, someone was looking out for you guys. And the baby was born and was fine. It took a long time, and he says it was very, very draining, but he says the baby was born, Max was born. He says after he was psychologically and emotionally exhausted. He says he went out of the room to get some air, and he says I see right outside my room. He says there must be 10 or 20 yeshiva boys, and they're saying Tehillim. Right outside where Max is born. What was it? He said they ever had some sort of a procedure done, and it was kidney. I don't remember what it was. And they brought him to Mount Sinai Hospital, and the Rebbe was in the next room. So the boys were outside. They were saying, "Tell him." While the Rebbe was in the room, the boys were saying, "Tell him." He says, right outside where Max was supposed to be, you know, not make it. Yeah, I had the boys of the Rebbe. He says they were saying, "Tell him." He says, and I'm absolutely convinced that that's why Max made it. He says, ever since then, he says, we felt close to them. I said, thanks for that. I said, I know you've been 20 years, and you wait for now to tell me. But anyways, that's story. Max. By the way, his operation was fine. He's still making songs. He didn't go platinum again, but he's still trying. Anyway, but his voice is fine. Anyways, I think it's good. Anything?
Any more questions? I have a question from.
Yeah, so I'll just Rabbi Weinberg over Shalom. I once had a shir and I was asking for advice. What was it? It was actually I started a shir that was in that insurance company, and there were young boys and young girls were coming to it, and I was a buck, and I felt a little uncomfortable because it was more girls than boys. It started becoming, and I wasn't sure maybe do I have to pass this on to a woman or whatever. So I asked him, what do I do? You know, he was an older chassid. He was in Johannesburg at the time. I asked Rabbi Weinberg, what do I need to do here? So he says, you need to encourage more women to come, because if more girls come, more boys will come. I said, fine. And that was number one. Number two is what the point I was saying. He said, and the other thing is, I'll give you says you need to start your share on time. He says, even more important, you need to finish on time. That was his advice. All right. So that's we'll call it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.